Hello watch enthusiasts. Now today I bring you a video which is very different to my usual videos. This is a very long video. This is probably going to be a one-off, or this isn't going to be a regular occurrence, but it's an hour-long video with a discussion between myself and one of my kind viewers, Ben, who's kindly sent me his collection in photographs. This video, I hope, will help people know what a watch is really like to own, because I know that I can only tell you so much, having not actually owned some of the watches I talk about on this channel. So I hope this video will give a better insight into actually the ownership of certain watches which I haven't owned. So without any further ado, I'll go straight into the video. I would like to say one thing though. It's that I apologise for the sound quality in the video, but Ben and myself did the utmost to improve the sound quality during the call. But there's only so much that one can do on the telephone. Hello again. Fantastic. If we could begin with the story behind your Breitling, a beautiful watch, I must say.
Well, so this sort of escapade of collecting watches started in about 1999, and at that point in time, I'd only ever had sort of cheap watches up to that point in time, but right. I came into some money and decided that I wanted to buy a watch that I could leave as an heirloom to maybe a future son. And so I then started looking into, I went into goldsmiths and a number of other jewellers, Watches of Switzerland, and looking around at watches. And I, probably like you, don't have enormous wrists. And so I was starting to look at smaller sized watches. And I fell in love with this, my Breitling. So the Breitling is a Breitling Cold Ocean automatic. Right. And it was my first decent self-winding automatic watch. And at that point in time, I knew very little about them. But on the whole, when I sort of went to have a look at this, and I was sort of lured in at the watch dealer, I didn't want something on a metal clasp. Yes. And so I wanted something leather, but I wanted something that if it got wet would be both comfortable to wear, but still could survive a little bit of water.
Oh, so hence the shark skin.
Indeed.
Ah.
But also I sort of went a bit further and bought what I had never seen at the time, a deployment clasp. And so the opportunity of having effectively an infinitely adjustable strap through the deployment clasp on the Breitling, because it slides through. Ah. And so I bought that in 1999. And at the time when I bought the watch, he said, "We'll go away and wear it and make a note of the time when you accurately set it, and then come back in a couple of months and we can regulate the watch." And I've never heard of this before. So I made a note of how many minutes or seconds it had been fast or slow, and then went back into the shop. It was with them for probably only a couple of days, and then came back to me after it's been regulated. And even to this day, it keeps, I guess in my opinion, sort of ridiculous time. It really doesn't lose or gain very much at all if I wear it consistently. But at the time, one of the significant sort of features of the watch was, I think it was one of the first that Breitling had done that was a COSC officially certified chronometer. Oh. So my hopes were that it would actually keep time extraordinarily well, and it has.
Well, I mean, Breitling are known for their accuracy, if anything.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Well, I mean, they are known for, or at least I've heard of them. I think they get a lot of flack, sadly, for using certain ETA-based movements, but they modify them to such a fantastic extent, and regulate them so fantastically well, that I must say that the people who I know who own them have only have good things to say of them.
So only in the last, I guess, year have I started to understand the different mechanisms inside the watches, and yes, I understand this has a ETA 2824-2 movement. Yes. Inside this particular watch. But it's a fantastic piece, and so I think over the lifetime of owning it so far, it's only ever been serviced twice. Wow. Since 1999, yeah. But both times, I think, when I went into the watch dealer and they gave me sort of options and choices, to go away to Breitling was exactly the same cost as the dealer doing it. So I chose to send it away to Breitling for them to look after the watch.
Yes.
And it's been great. And I think at that point in time, I wanted something special. And it was probably on the first service that I went in with the watch, which was probably getting on for at least 5 years later. While it was then away, I thought, I have nothing else to wear, which is not a particularly good scenario to be in when it's probably your only watch. Yes. And so I really loved the opportunity of wearing something like an Omega Seamaster.
Yes.
And at the point in time, they had a second-hand one in the dealership. And they first of all allowed me to wear this temporarily as it had come in on part exchange for something, which on a metal clasp. So I took this away and wore it for, I think, the sort of 4 weeks or 8 weeks that it was away,
yes.
For Breitling for servicing. Fell in love with the watch, and then when it came back, I didn't want to part with it. So, and it appealed to me for a number of reasons. It's a mid-sized version of the Seamaster Professional.
Yes.
And so, again, it's a very similar size to my Breitling. Yes. It didn't dominate my wrist. But one of the things when I remember looking at the Breitling bracelets, they didn't really feel for me, certainly the bracelet that came on the Colt, that it was a very good quality bracelet. It felt a bit tinny, it felt a bit lightweight, and I felt absolutely opposite with the Seamaster. It's a beautiful bracelet that's so comfortable to wear. So this then became my sort of everyday suit watch, and then I guess sadly my Breitling retired to becoming more special occasions rather than an everyday timepiece.
Well, it's interesting what you say about the bracelets, because I have similar feelings about Breitling bracelets, but from my perspective, it's more the fact that they're primarily all polished, which I've found, get scratched extremely easily, whereas that brushed finish on the Seamaster, it tends to be very, very durable.
Yeah, so I mean, the Seamaster itself is actually from a similar age to the Breitling.
Yes.
I think my watch was about 5 years old when I bought it, and I bought it probably the first service, which was 5 years after I bought the Breitling. But even as a second-hand watch, at the time, there were only light abrasions on the clasp of the bracelet on the Seamaster. The rest of the watch is absolutely immaculate.
Right.
And I very much liked the kind of understated look. And I guess that's one of the things that set the theme off in terms of looking along my preferences of watches, which were very much individuals and friends who knew me at the time were trying to encourage me to buy things like the Navimeter or Chronomat. And I've never been into multiple dials. I like the very simple look of a watch face.
Yes.
That's sort of in terms of personal preference. And so the Omega for me was a very similar, understated watch. It slips underneath the shirt very, very easily. For years, until very, very recently, I've kept it on a steel strap, and it's only very recently where I'll come to a bit later that I've decided to change that now for a sort of custom rubber strap which matches the blue dial,
right?
But with just a bit of white stitching around the outside edge. So that was as far as the Omega went, and then many years after that, as age crept on with me, I sort of discovered that when I first bought the Breitling, I could read the words in the very bottom of the display on the Omega that would say Swiss made.
Yes.
And I think the moment I almost stepped into my sort of my early 40s a few years ago, discovered that actually not only could I not read that, but I was probably squinting more than I would probably appreciate while looking at the date.
Ah, I see.
So more and more I then thought, actually, I'd like something that I can wear more casually, and something with a bit of a change, which led me towards looking at the tag. Yes. So the tag I then bought was my next watch, and as the grand date, it had a larger date aperture, and I quite liked the individualistic sort of view of the watch being something on black and white, and a sub-dial for the seconds. It was a little different to the other watches that I had. It's a slightly larger watch face, but was unlike the sort of cheaper, more mainstream Formula One watches from Tag. Yes. This was a little different. I haven't seen very many of them around. And that certainly is one of the things that I guess has steered my influences in my preferences of what I'd like in a watch.
Yes, well, I mean, I certainly haven't seen any F1s like yours, but I must say the sub-seconds really are a beautiful touch on the dial, and do separate it from a lot of other watches of that type. Yes.
And I guess also it's one of those things that creates a very balanced view of the watch face.
Yes.
So the date is at the bottom, the sub-dial is sort of in the middle. And I bought the tag second-hand a little bit on a whim, hoping that it was going to be what I wanted. And in actual fact, having gotten it and worn it extensively, it's built like a tank. It is hugely robust. I haven't really managed to pick up any scratches on the watch itself over the period of time I've had it. The only one slight thing that I felt is because of the way the design of the watch is, I've tried putting it onto a leather strap, but not having lugs, just felt that it just didn't look right on it.
Yes.
So it's the only watch that I now keep on a steel bracelet, and it looks fine on that, but it's not something, because of the design where the shoulders go on the watch, that lends itself particularly well to changing that strap to anything else.
Yes, I mean, I know the feeling, because I was trying to find an automatic Seamaster 200 a while back, and I had difficulty finding the watch in the first place, but after that I started to ask myself whether or not it would actually be comfortable to wear it on the bracelet at all times, seeing as I cared so much about maintaining the watch when it was such a rare piece. And of course, having those integrated lugs with that very, very narrow lug gap, it would make it impossible to really put it on a leather and feel that it was safe on the wrist. So I do know the feeling.
Yeah. So fortunately, the tag, unlike the 200 that you were looking at, does have regular spring bars underneath, and you can put a regular bracket on it without a problem. And in fact, you could have bought this watch originally, I think, with a rubber strap on it as an alternative to the steel bracelet that I had on it. But this is the watch that I would default to if I was going swimming. So because it's got a steel bracelet on it, it just sort of hoses down afterwards. In actual fact, before I bought this, I did actually take the Seamaster 300 diving when I was out in Rhodes, and I found that the opportunity of, I guess the two or three things from the Seamaster that stood out to me were the opportunity of the extension to go over the top of a wetsuit was invaluable, and Omega have done very well to work out exactly how much to add to a bracelet in terms of how much a wetsuit will add to your wrist dimensions, because it was perfect.
Yes, I mean, that is critical with the dive extension. I think that's probably why people are going with their watches. That people tend to buy watches with ratcheting extensions these days, because so many companies have got it wrong. But it's true that Omega got it right, and they've kept it the same for a reason all these years. So it's definitely a really good touch on the bracelet.
I guess the one other thing of having dived using the Omega, that it's interesting how individuals give them stick without realising the sort of reason why. So the bezel itself is not particularly easy to turn.
Yes.
And it's not easy to turn when your hands are wet. However, it does mean that there is no opportunity for you to knock the bezel and change how you set the watch before you dive.
Yes.
So you'll see as I come on to other watches later on, those watches that have a very easy positive change mean that if you were diving around coral or rocks or other things, you could invariably knock the bezel and therefore be fairly seriously out in terms of your timing, depending on how much you've knocked it.
Yes.
I found with the Omega, instead of trying to use your fingertips on the bezel to move it, if you place your hand flat on the top of the glass and put some pressure down and then rotate your whole hand, you can intentionally then move the bezel far easier.
Yes.
But that's been the one watch that I have actually chosen to dive with so far.
Yes. Well, I noticed you also have your Seiko SKX. How did that come about?
Yeah, so up until the point in time where I had the Breitling, the Omega, and the tag, I was a very uninformed watch purchaser. I bought them specifically out of, I wanted either a specific automatic movement as a piece of heritage. I think I'd very wrongly had some very swayed opinions around the negativity of a quartz watch, and at that point in time strongly believed so much around watches should be Swiss made.
Yes.
However, having spent far more time getting into watches, having realised that actually there are three strong cores of watchmaking and heritage across the world, from sort of American, Swiss and Japanese, the opportunity of actually getting a hold of an extraordinarily good Japanese-made automatic movement, and I thought I need to try one of these. I need to, and it's so affordable.
Yes.
That coupled with the fact of which I've understood very recently that Seiko have now stopped making these, and that
yes,
they're becoming quite difficult to get hold of.
it's a real shame.
Yeah. So I bought this watch. This was the next purchase that I made, and although it came on a rubber strap, I thought that would be the best for diving, and I can always put that back on there.
Yes.
I kind of wanted something different. So you'll notice with the watches, I've got a black watch with a black strap, a blue watch with a blue strap. I've got a white face watch, and for me, a watch is part of a gentleman's attire that should be as appropriately worn as the right pair of shoes, a belt, or something else.
Of course.
And so, with that same kind of context, the Seiko really fitted in very well with me in having a little bit more of a very rugged, everyday, casual watch that I wasn't intending to give a beating, but like, I guess before, most of my watches being divers' watches, would all stand up quite happily to getting wet without ever causing the mechanism or movement of the watch any kind of difficulty or otherwise.
Yes.
So it was my first Japanese watch that I bought. I really don't like the Jubilee bracelets that they went on, so I bought the one with a rubber strap instead.
Yes.
I looked at the difference between the Japanese and the Asian movements, and I thought, well, essentially they're all still Seiko watches with exactly the same movement inside them. I appreciate that obviously the Japanese ones were made for a homegrown marketplace in terms of exclusivity,
yes,
and will probably hold their value a little more, but it's likely that pro rata, I'm going to pay less for this watch, and I'll still get all of the same enjoyment out of it. The one thing that was very interesting to note was actually on the dial, I actually found this slightly less cluttered, because there's only one line of text at the bottom rather than two.
Yes.
Where it mentions the jewels in terms of the watch strap, the face.
Yes.
So since buying that, I then bought, as I've already got a sharkskin strap, a rubber strap, and steel strap. I wanted to get something that could stand up to the rigor of getting wet, but was a little different. And so I bought some Hadley Roma Cordura straps.
Mm.
So I bought two. One was a grey, which is what's on the watch at the moment, and the other, which would lend itself superbly to my Grail watch, which if I one day end up buying would be suitable for it, is a black Cordura with a custom orange stitching highlight that goes around it.
Mm.
And that might give you one or two indications as to my Grail watches, so we'll come on to that later.
Yes.
But that really got me into the flavour of Japanese watches, and Seiko quite specifically, and looking at the 7S26 movement, which seems to have found its way from the original Seiko 5s right the way through to more modern watches that Seiko have been making. And that then made me think, well, actually, the heritage of this watch actually goes a long way back. And as I started looking into this, I found I had an opportunity of getting hold of a vintage Seiko 5 watch. And this is the yellow-styled faced watch in my collection.
A very original piece.
Yeah, and it's when I saw the photos of it, they were very, very close-up photos, which showed every possible blemish in the watch itself.
Mm.
But when you actually get it in the flesh, your eyes can't see as well as a macro lens on a camera can.
No.
It's in superb condition. It's been fully serviced and taken care of. It runs and takes beautiful time. And for me, I wear this at work when I'm wearing a yellow tie and the rest of my attire, and it's something that a number of people have remarked how unusual the watch is, and they've never seen anything like it before.
Mm.
And I feel very fortunate that because I've started to get into watches, it's caused me to discover a whole world of timepieces that I would have overlooked or never had the opportunity of discovering.
Yes.
So I wear this very, very fondly, but it was probably the cheapest watch in my collection by such a long way.
Hmm.
But I love it very dearly because it's so unusual.
Yes. I mean, I must say, those Seiko 5s have become a real icon, though. And I think they're having a real comeback at the moment. More and more are being discovered because there are so many versions which were lost throughout the years, and one's seeing new ones every day these days.
So would I understand correctly that the kind of movement that's in the oldest Seiko 5 that I have is exactly the same kind of movements as the 7S26 that's
They're very similar variants of the sort of base Seiko movement, that sort of base on which the other movements are sort of built. Yes, it's a very similar movement, you're quite right.
Because I guess my reason for asking is that my most recent purchase was a Seiko 5 sort of dress watch. And although I've sort of seen a couple of sort of Japanese home market Seikos, the sort of the SAR 033 and the 035.
Yes.
At this point in time, having not seen them and not having a lot of opportunity in the UK of getting hold of these, I did have a chance to pick up this particular Seiko 5, which I bought new, but it's not an expensive Seiko 5 movement. But I wanted just something that was, again, understated, but more neutral in terms of a dress watch. So the three that I will sort of normally wear with a suit would either be the Omega, and one of the two Seiko 5s, because they'll slip under a sleeve very, very easily, and very understated from there. So that was sort of what led me up to sort of the most recent sort of purchase. And I must admit, I've been very fond of the way that that sort of hooks me into the other sort of world of proper watch horology. The way that Japan has created its movements from scratch, and they're uniquely different to Swiss movements, and so on.
Yes, I mean it's interesting. It's interesting the way movements in Japan tend to be very brand specific. And I think it would seem that in the Japanese market, it's more important to have a movement that's made by the brand in-house than one with features such as hacking or hand winding. Although I think they're pulling out of that trend these days.
Right, it's in that similar kind of sense. It's interesting, yes, because all the Seikos have their own internal movements.
Yeah.
And only recently have I come to realise that, of course, with the Swatch Group now owning so many brands, that the movement inside so many of these premier brands are actually all made by the same watch manufacturing movement company, ETA, who's also owned by Swatch.
Yes.
And so to a certain sense, you're paying for design style, you're paying for the build and fit and quality of the actual watch face, the case, the strap, the mechanisms, that all comes to the outside of the watch. And then you're getting on top of that very much an industry standard Swiss movement that's then put into it, or one of a number of grades ranging from sort of an OK grade right up to a chronometer grade movement.
Yes, quite. I must say, I think now things in Switzerland are being sort of thrown around because now that the regulations for what's actually going to be labelled as Swiss made have changed to make it altogether more difficult to make a watch, or to label a watch Swiss made due to a higher percentage of parts now needing to be made in Switzerland. A lot of brands are going to up their prices, which is going to change things, I think, with regards to the movements used. And also with ETA limiting their supply now, that will probably make a greater variety of movements appear in different brands.
So it was only within I guess, the last year that I even realised that, that a lot of these Swiss brands were actually owned by the same parent company, and that ETA provide their movements to not just within the same brand, but I believe further afield than just their own brand, as a little bit like BMW selling their engines to other car manufacturers.
Exactly. Except, of course, now that that's being limited, I think so that the Swatch Group can sort of undercut other companies in terms of pricing. I think that was probably the main reason for the decision to limit their supplying of smaller companies that aren't owned by the Swatch Group. But that's what's happening in the next year.
I could also see another trend potentially from a manufacturer like ETA, where they might reserve the highest derivative versions of their movements, like their chronometers, only for their own brands.
Yes.
And they might allow to be sold a sort of a standard 2824 movement to someone else, but they've only the sort of the lower accuracy derivatives of the movement itself.
Yes.
that would sort of help provide their own brand uniqueness, I can imagine, going forward.
Yes, yes, it would definitely help them. But I mean, one is noticing a lot of people are now. Actually, what you say is quite right because, for example, Tudor are now making their own chronometer movements because they can't get the ETA chronometers.
Okay.
And one's seen that in the new Black Bay and the Pelagos.
So I had just assumed that as Tudor were a sub-brand of someone like Rolex, that effectively they use older generation Rolex movements in them rather than the latest generation of Rolex movements, which were reserved for Rolex as the premier brand themselves.
Oh no, I mean, now they're producing very much their own movements in-house that bear little resemblance to Rolex movements. But it's quite interesting, actually. The Tudor movements tend to be better finished than the Rolex movements, simply because Tudor tend to go for open case backs rather than the closed ones that Rolex have.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting.
Yes, I mean, it does make one ask why one pays so much for Rolex. Obviously, there are other qualities to Rolexes, but I think this is definitely a sore point within the group.
So that's something I found very interesting, certainly around Omega. So when you're buying something like a dive watch, your mind immediately leaps towards ruggedness and rigidity. And so a watch like that, you would normally assume would have had a solid steel case back, and that the whole heft of the watch would be built as rugged as possible.
Yes.
And it's interesting how we've seen a number of manufacturers almost want to lend themselves to a flyback case back where you can see through to the mechanism of movement, because it becomes a selling point of you can see the mechanism. But I guess in my view and opinion, it doesn't lend itself characteristically well to something that's designed to be ruggedized.
Yes, I think
it lends itself so much more towards a dress watch.
Yes, you're quite right. I mean, that was one of my criticisms for Omega launching the new Ploprof, the sort of Super Seamaster, with an open case back this year. And I think that defeats the object of making a diver with a 1200 meter depth rating, and then putting an open case back when actually one could have increased the depth rating immensely if one stuck with a closed one.
So I think that's also another very interesting thing about dive watches, in that so the Omega Seamaster Professional, along with the Planet Ocean, the Sea Dweller, and a number of others, have all got helium escape valves.
Yes.
And yet, the kind of scenario where you'd ever actually need one of those, when you're going down in either a dive bell or another particular type of environment, is extraordinarily rare. Most scuba divers will never be in an environment where they would need such a watch. And I found it particularly interesting in that actually out of all the watches that I own, it's actually the Breitling which doesn't have that, which is certified to a depth of 500 metres, which is quite a bit significantly more than the Seamaster.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that sort of lends itself to the no-nonsense, but do you want to go scuba diving? Take our watch. It's absolutely fine for as deep as you'll ever want to go.
Yes. No, I think you're quite right there. Breitling really catered to what is actually necessary, not just to add features for no apparent reason. Also, in the long run, it actually costs one more to service a watch with a helium escape valve, seeing as one has to have that resealed along with the case back.
Very true.
Yes.
I think actually in the time that I've owned the Omega, I've probably only had the battery replaced twice on it, actually, and so I've had that for it must be a good 10 to 14 years, I think. It feels like, at least.
Right.
From that one. And so I guess all this collection so far then lends me to my cheap Beta watch, which was my G-Shock.
Right.
That I purchased purely because after every time I purchased a watch to take the last watch to become more important or significant, and to buy almost a Beta watch, I've ended up falling in love with that particular watch more and not wanting to get it beaten up. So I thought, well, finally, I'm going to buy just a relatively inexpensive, ruggedized watch that actually really doesn't matter what I do to it.
Yes.
So that was the reason for sort of the G-Shock as a purchase. It was something that I could do gardening in and certainly wouldn't worry about the watch. But it was a very interesting note that when I actually put the watch on, the way that they've designed the seating for the strap that comes down, it's insanely comfortable on your wrist.
Right.
underneath where the rubber strap comes down are a pair of sort of plastic flanges that help it sit on your wrist so that your wrist will never become pinched at the top, where the rubber sort of sits. So yeah, that's my sort of everyday beater.
Yes.
So I guess the collection has sort of evolved over a period of, I'm guessing sort of 17 to 18 odd years now. I'm sort of late 90s when I bought the Breitling. I'm guessing at about 99, maybe 98, something along those period of time, to 2016 to now. And over that sort of period of time, I've noticed some trends in what I've been buying and why. So my preference is very much, being a subjective, a personal thing, I don't like cluttered dials.
Yes.
And I guess that comes from wanting to be able to casually look at the watch without having to figure out where all the hands are with a bunch of distractions.
Of course.
So that was sort of one key sort of aim. I guess now that I have sort of a plethora of watches, there's sort of a direction that I'm sort of heading in. So I've noticed that I haven't got any field watches. I've concentrated a lot on dive watches. I have 1 or 2 dress watches, but there are a couple of field watches that I really like the look of. And I don't have anything with any sort of American heritage either. So there's a couple of watches that I'm sort of, if I had the money while I was building the collection, that I would have chosen if I ever had the choice. And I think even now, if one sort of comes up and I'm in a financial position to be able to afford it, then it is something I guess I would love to add to it. Yes. I guess the first of those would be, it's quite a classic, I guess, for watch enthusiasts, but the Hamilton Khaki Field Auto.
Yes, fantastic watch.
And I've noticed in terms of the different watch sizes that I have a sweet spot on my wrist, which is, I guess, between 40 to 42 millimeters. So I can wear smaller watches and they look okay, but as a personal preference, I like something that's a little bit larger diameter of the watch face.
Right.
So the 42, which I've had a look at, I really love. It's a very simple styled watch, and it's something that I haven't got so far in terms of heritage. So I understand that Hamilton was originally an American make of watch.
Yes. Yes, one of the very, very first electric watches, which is ironic because most of their line's automatic these days. But no, they're a fantastic brand, I have to say. I mean, I have a Jazzmaster, which I absolutely adore. I bought it on the bracelet, but it now lives on a rubber strap, not a rubber strap, sorry, a blue leather strap. It sort of passed briefly on a rubber strap, but it's now sort of settled on a blue leather strap, and I must say it's a fantastic watch, and I have considered the khaki, but sadly other watches have sort of popped into my mind before buying it, and stopped me at the last minute. But definitely a fantastic watch with a great heritage.
And it's something for me that I think it would lend itself well to wearing under a suit. You could still wear it very casually with a pair of jeans.
Yes.
It's a very flexible watch in terms of its appeal, its look, and it sort of has a bit of a timeless classic feel to it as a watch. So that would be sort of the first one. It's a relatively inexpensive watch, but that would be something that I think I'd really like to add to the collection, primarily because I don't have a field watch at all.
Yes.
And I quite like the simplicity of not having sort of crown guards and protectors on them that all of my divers seem to have on them.
Yes.
The other was, while I was sort of going through, originally looking at the Breitling, I had a number of friends saying, oh, you shouldn't buy this watch, you should buy ...
Yes.
I found my interest in my personal preferences have sort of veered away from that towards something a little bit more understated. When it came around to buying a tag, a bunch of friends said, oh, the watch you really want is the Monaco. And of course it does have a very individualistic style to it. But in a similar way, at the point in time I was looking at the Monaco, that I felt just wasn't right for me then.
Yes.
The watch from Tag's line that I would really love to have owned if I could have done was actually the Monza.
Yes.
And the Monza as a watch really appealed to me because it's iconically a round face in what feels like a square watch bracelet. It's rounded off at the edges, but it has this sort of feeling of a cross between a round and square watch.
Yes.
But it's elegantly simple.
Yes, it's a beautiful watch, and one which I think is overlooked far too often, because most people buy the Monaco, as you say, but I've got a friend at the moment who's absolutely lusting after buying a Monza, so I definitely understand the appeal, because they are beautiful watches and really unique in terms of design.
So what sort of movement does a Monza have in it?
Now, well, usually tag movements are ETA based, but they put a chronograph module on the top, which leads to having such an absurdly high. Well, I say absurd. I like high joule counts. For example, the Monaco has 41 joules, which compared to the usual 25 of an ETA movement is a lot. But I mean, I would by no means say that's a bad thing, because again, they're simple to service at their base, but they have a very accurate, very functional chronograph module parked on top of the movement.
You see, as personal preference, I've been looking at the Monza without the chronograph, the sort of more plain-faced Monza.
Well, the plain-faced Monza has an ETA-based movement, albeit it is modified and decorated heavily, seeing as it's one of the higher-end models in the tag range.
So that used to be my personal preference, and I still really love this watch. And at some point in time in the future, if I'm in a position, I'd love to get this. The Monaco itself has started to grow on me.
Yes.
So I was immediately dismissive at the point in time, 1.5 decades, nearly 2 decades ago, when I started to look at watches. I guess because of the popularity at the time.
Yes.
So most of my watches that I've chosen, I've either not seen many other people wearing, or when I have. So when the Seamaster Professional was extraordinarily popular as a watch, I found myself gravitating to wearing one of the others more in terms of distinctiveness.
Yes.
Whereas now I don't see many Monacos around, and it appears that TAG have therefore done a number of different derivatives of the Monaco, ranging from sort of I think 2 dials and 3 dials and without a chronometer on them.
Yes.
So it's something that I might possibly think about later on, but certainly the Monza would be sort of the priority from TAG. But the whole look and feel of that watch actually sort of leads me on to another watch that it's a hugely expensive watch to get, and that they've remained very, very expensive, but I see very, very rarely, and I love because of the simple style, is the Panerai Luminor.
Oh, they are beautiful watches. I agree with you entirely there.
And the way that the crown guard sits is sort of very unique. It's their own style of sort of clamp that holds down the guard.
Yeah, it's really a distinctive piece. I mean, they are large, though, Panerais. That was the one thing that turned me off them in terms of wearing them. I mean, I personally can't pull off a 47mm case.
And is that the smallest size that they do?
I think they do go down to a 44 in some, which is just about passable for me, at least.
Yeah.
Because I have quite slender wrists as well, so...
So I can at a push pull off a 44/45. My TAG Heuer Formula 1 is about a 44.3 millimeters calipers. I think it's roughly about 44 millimeters across.
Right.
And I wonder whether it's to do with the way that the lugs that hold the strap are very close into the watch, and so the way that it sits doesn't protrude much further than the actual bevel of the watch. So yeah, I've not tried on a Panerai at all, but I guess it's very, very similar, I guess, in terms of distinctiveness to the shape and style of the Monza. Yes.
Yes, and I mean the beautiful thing about the Panerai is also the straps they come on. Are whether you choose a leather or a rubber, they're such high quality, and really do look fantastic on the watch.
So yeah, I probably would have chosen the leather on the Panerai, but that I guess gets onto straps, and you'll see through the collection I've gone from shark skin to, in terms of leather, I have rubber, I have steel, and I guess there are one or two things that are missing. I'd like the collection to end up with almost like something for everyone, so that I've actually got. Because I find that both the leather, the deployment clasp on the Breitling is hugely comfortable to wear. It's so surprising. Yes. You almost forget that it's on because all the bracelet is so light. I love the blue that brings out in the Omega, where I can wear it with jeans, I can wear it with anything. I'm wearing blue or a blue suit, and it lends itself equally. But I could go swimming with the Omega because it's a rubber strap.
Yes.
So I'd like something with sort of alligator or crocodile, and I have something with that in the dress watch that I have.
Mm.
But I'm missing stuff. I'm missing NATO straps hugely.
Oh yes.
And that's sort of you'll see that come out actually when I start talking about sort of my Grail watches and stuff. But I'm yet to kind of discover those in a way that I don't have any yet. But I do have mixed sizes between the lug sizes across all my watches.
Yes.
So the Seiko SKX007, I believe, is a 22 mil lug.
Yes.
Some of the others are a mixture between 18 and 20 mil lugs.
Yes.
So it means going out to buy NATO straps in a whole range of widths,
yes.
just to kind of see how they're going to work, rather than being able to have complete interchangeability between straps.
Yes, I mean, because I have similar problems in my collection. I have my Longines is an 18, and then a lot of my dive watches are 22s. So I mean, I tend to buy 20mm straps, and then a couple of straps simply for individual watches, so they fit perfectly. But I don't tend to have a problem with wearing a strap that's smaller than the lug width.
Okay.
In that sort of typical sort of Sean Connery.
That's the kind of thing that would niggle me in an enormous way.
Ah, yes. Yes.
But that, so sort of moving through that in terms of NATO straps and sort of aims for the collection. So I'd like to have a variety of watches that lend themselves between dive, field, and dress watch.
Yes.
To have a variety of colours, which I'm now getting to, which really help when you're wearing a watch for a variety of different occasions, different attires. To end up with the collection representing a better selection of horology, ranging from America to Swiss to Japanese. And at the moment, of course, I've got 3 watches at this point in time, which are all Japanese.
Yes.
So, ironically, note to self, I want to sort of stop buying Seiko Japanese watches. However, one of the ones that I would very much like to add to the collection, just because I think it's a beautiful watch, it was very individualistic and not hugely expensive. And I happen to know that you pretty much think the same on this, is actually the 55 fathoms mod on the Seiko 5.
Yes, it's a fantastic watch. I mean, I've been wearing mine for a little bit, for a few weeks now. I've taken it to France, back to England. I've even been swimming with it, even though it doesn't have a screw-down crown. It worked beautifully through that. Now I've been wearing that on a distressed leather NATO strap recently, and also on distressed leather green. Simple, normal style of strap, and it really does look beautiful on that sort of that colouring.
So I know that there are a number of dials and colours that they effectively do the sort of the 50 fathoms homage in.
Yes.
Ranging from sort of more of a gold tint, ranging through to sort of more silver and platinum, sort of steel.
Yes.
Coloured accent on the watch. Now, I don't wear, the only piece of jewellery that I would ever wear would be a sort of platinum wedding. So not having any gold, I've steered completely clear of sort of either two-tone or gold coloured accents on them. So I would go for the sort of silver understated with sort of the black bezel to the 55 fathoms. And I guess my aim for that would be to get hold of the 55 fathoms and then put it on. I really quite like the sort of the black and silver Bond NATO.
Yes, yes, that does look very nice. I've tried mine on one of those, and I must say it suited the watch extremely well.
And it would finally give me something on a NATO in my collection to be able to wear. So in terms of lending it that way. So that gives you an idea about sort of, I guess, where I might go collection-wise.
Yes.
The sort of 55 fathoms, Luminor, Monza, and the Hamilton. I guess harking a little bit through my choices brings me on to if money were no object. And it sort of brings me down to, if you ask me the question of what I would do if I was left money by a relative who passed on, and I wanted to buy a watch, what would it be? And I guess probably some of these might well not be a surprise, but until very, very recently, my Grail watch was the 42mm Planet Ocean.
Ah, yes.
And I love the specific derivative or variant of this is completely in black with the exception of the 12, 9 and 6 numerals in orange,
Yes.
which lends itself onto the rubber strap, which also just has the highlight stitching in orange.
Mm.
Now, I know they do one with a big orange bezel around the outside, and to me, it stands out too much. There's no finesse to it. It's quite gary in terms of its brightness, and it's just a personal preference. It's not that it's a bad watch at all.
Yes.
But that would be the combination for me, and that's one of the things that got me into sort of rubber straps after trying one of these on at the jewelers. And when I then came back, I realised that actually I couldn't buy this kind of strap for my Seamaster because I have the mid-size. You cannot get one of these straps that will fit right up against the case of the watch.
Yes.
Which is why I went after the blue strap that I did. But that would be, until very recently, my sort of ideal Grail watch. It can be worn in so many occasions. It looks great with everything from a suit to casual wear. It's beautifully built, and it's the sort of next generation on in terms of accuracy. And from what I understand, and obviously not being any kind of a technical understanding on the insides and the manufacturers, but their coaxial chronometer, which doesn't exist in any of my collection, I've come to understand is sort of a generation leap on in terms of the watch's accuracy from where they were before.
Well, I mean, the coaxial movements, I mean, they're quite a recent innovation, actually, but it's simply the escapement that's different, which means there's extremely minimal friction on the escapement, which means you can have extremely long service lives to the watches, and because of this very minimal friction, and there's no change in this friction over the lifetime of the watch, they can be regulated to such a fantastic level that I think that's the key advantage to them.
I see.
But, I mean, I must say, in the Planet Ocean range, I am personally a fan of the Good Planet. I love that blue and orange combination. But, of course, that's very bright and can be difficult to wear and match with clothing.
Right. So this would be almost the original Planet Ocean that was released with the because of course now they do them with a clear case back.
Yes.
And sort of harking back to the original Planet Ocean when it was released, came with a solid case back, which I felt really suited the watch's sort of rugged design. I mean, this thing goes down to 600 meters.
Yes.
Not that you'll ever go down to that kind of depth diving. No. You know, a normal paddy diver goes down to 18 meters, and if you get advanced, you're good to go to 30. So you're never really going to be in a situation that's going to need that.
No.
But it's a beautiful piece, and that for ages, simply enough, was sort of my Grail watch, until probably the last, I guess, 6 months to a year, really, where their reissuance of their original Seamaster 300, which I know has been released sort of as a limited edition Spectre watch as well.
Yes.
Carries across again a beautiful level of simplicity. The dial is very uncluttered. It doesn't even have a date window on it.
Yes.
But everything about it is very fine. It will go with absolutely anything. It still has a very original sort of feel. It doesn't feel like the Seamaster is trying to copy some other brand's look and appeal and style to me. But yeah, those two watches would be my sort of my top of Grail, what I would aspire to if I ever could.
Well, they're fantastic choices, I have to say. I mean, the new 300s, or should I say the old 300s, I suppose, in their design, the hands, I think, are my favourite aspect of them. I love those broad arrow hands found on older Seamasters.
Yeah, they are quite unique. And sometimes for me, when I look at a watch, it takes me a while to realise what specific I actually like about it. I visually look at it and go, that's really nice. And I spend a long time trying to put my finger on what is the specific detail. So like with the Planet Ocean, I was like, I really like this. Why do I like the Planet Ocean so much? And it was sort of easy legibility and readability, the fact that the date window isn't framed, it doesn't draw attention to it necessarily, and it's got sort of subtle accents like sort of the very tip of the second hand having an orange lume.
Yes.
As it over the sweeps round, it's just very, very subtle, small details that are quite classy to look at. There's nothing gary, nothing bright, nothing sort of attention-seeking about it.
Yes.
Whereas I think that's what put me off a lot of when I was looking at Breitlings when I first started. A lot of the collection were, I felt quite ostentatious.
Yes.
They were sort of quite, look at me.
Yes, I
which I
agree with
found
that.
is quite the opposite with Omega.
Yes.
Yeah, they're my personal preferences.
No, I think Omega are very a very shrewd brand with the way they make their watches. They try to make them understated while also standing out. Whereas I think you're quite right, Breitling do tend to swing towards the very bold and slightly ostentatious designs.
Although, having said that, only very recently there's one Breitling that really stood out to me, and I wonder whether it's for a very similar reason, which is the Seiko Heritage.
Yes.
Which is, again, it's a little bit more simple in terms of their range. It's very uncluttered as a watch, and although I already have a blue watch, sort of the blue Super Ocean Heritage, I believe, does have a beautiful sort of feel to it.
Yes. I mean, they're wonderful watches on the wrist as well. They're very slim and quite light, and have that sort of all polished case. So I think they do give a much more dressy look to a Seamaster. My only complaint with the Heritage is that it doesn't have any lume on the bezel, which I find a bit inconvenient at times.
Yeah, until recently I haven't really sort of considered lume on watches. I guess mainly because I've never tried sort of shining torches at them to then be able to see them in the dark. I've just allowed the normal daylight to shine on the watch, and they don't really perform particularly well in at night time after just being shot in the daytime. And I guess where my collection started, interestingly enough, the Breitling has an enormous lack of lume. So the Breitling itself, each of the numerals around the watch face are stainless steel numerals that have then been applied to the watch face, so they reflect light, but there's no lume on them at all.
Right.
The hands have some lume, as is there a very small dot on the top of the rotating bezel, but that's it.
Right.
Whereas, again, the F1 has a completely white face with pretty much no lume on the face, no lume on the bezel. It's only the hands that have any kind of lume to them at all.
Yes. Whereas
that's quite a contrast to the Seiko, which more recently I've sort of shone a torch at and sort of looked at it in the dark. And it's been sort of a whole new world to me about how you can do that, and then very, very usefully, see the watch in low light conditions superbly.
Yes. I mean, I think Seiko lume tends to actually embarrass more expensive watches more often than not, actually. I mean, I found with the exception of my Oris, which really does have fantastic lume, it may not be the brightest, but it's very, very long-lasting. I find that the Seiko 55 Fathoms I have has some of the best lume I've seen.
Wow. And I would probably anticipate that it's probably one of the most inexpensive watches that you own.
I have a few less expensive watches sort of dotted around from sort of the days when I wasn't very well informed on my watch collecting in my teens. But no, I mean, apart from that, my watches tend to sit in the sort of £500 to £1,000 mark in general. But I'm aiming to sell a few and make the collection a bit smaller to then move up into slightly higher tier watches.
So it's sort of an interesting thing. So you harked about where you started in your younger years.
Yes.
I guess that brings me on to one of my key regrets. When I was, I think, about 8 or 10 years old, I think I was probably nearer closer to about 8.
Yes.
My grandfather gave me a mechanical winding watch. It was a child's size watch, and I then still have this watch. Yes. And I think I didn't have the discipline, as young as I was, to not overwind the watch. And I suspect that what happened at the time was I had overwound the watch and it had therefore broken. Yeah. And instead of getting it repaired or serviced, it sort of went away in a box or cupboard. And my parents, unfortunately, about 20 to 25 years ago, had a loft fire. And a lot of my older possessions and stuff, things that were in the loft then, were completely destroyed. And I'm not sure whether or not it's either been lost in so many moves or whether or not it was consumed with inside that. There's sort of no invention for that. But now having a son who is coming up for 9 years old himself, I'm starting to think of the sorts of things that I want to pass on to him, and he's sort of seen my collection of watches, and I'm sort of harking to that point in time now, thinking, right, I now want to buy you almost like your first sensible watch, sort of as a watch for him. And that then reminded me hugely that, you know, my grandfather had given me a mechanical but a mechanical winding watch when I was younger, and I wish now, sort of enjoying and appreciating watches so much more, that I still have that watch.
Yes.
I think that's my one sort of big regret. I guess my other is, after having a number of mid-sized watches in my more recent collection, are lending themselves to a slightly larger, and also the flexibility of the lug width. I sort of wonder whether I would have been better getting the slightly larger Seamaster Professional 300M when I bought it, as opposed to the mid-size. I can still wear it now and it still looks great.
Yes, I mean, I think that with the design like that, really any size looks excellent, apart from the 28mm women's size, which I think would be a stretch.
Yeah, interestingly, actually, the Breitling Cold Ocean that I have, they did a ladies' version of this particular watch called EOCN.
Yes.
And that again was substantially smaller than this is a mid-size. But without looking at that, it's amazing how many individuals normally look at watches and assume that the stereotypical 42 to 46mm watches are men's, and anything below that is then, that's the women's version of that particular watch.
Of course, as you know well, that's not the truth.
Indeed.
Yes.
And they are hugely comfortable watches to wear. You know, I think the smallest bezel size watch I have is about a 36mm. Which is my baby Seiko 5. But then the others are anywhere between 38 and 44.
Right, because my watches have gone much smaller than that in terms of dress watches. I mean, actually, the one watch which I've owned for, I think, the longest is my Tissot, which I was given by my father, again in my teens. I had a swatch, an automatic swatch before that, but that was really my first watch, and that's a 35. And then I also have my Baume Mercier, which is obviously a vintage watch, so isn't really comparable in terms of sizing, but that's a 34. So I mean, it does put things into context when one sees how much smaller older watches were.
Yeah, it's very much a sort of a very modern thing in the last 20 to 30 years, how watches have grown in size in terms of being acceptable to wear a much larger watch.
Yes.
So, knowing full well my personal preferences and bias with the watch collection that's grown so far, are there any recommendations that you would make as to watch brands or particular watches that you think I should go and take a look at that I haven't really experienced or explored, and I've possibly overlooked in terms of my penchant for my watch collecting?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of wonderful brands which make watches these days. But I mean, I think having a look at some vintage things, seeing as you've enjoyed your vintage Seiko 5 so much, and I mean a brand which I've come across recently and provide fantastically good value watches, and I know you appreciate dive watches from the range you have. Yes, I think some vintage Philips watches might appeal to you. I don't know if you've heard of them.
No, I haven't.
They were a Swiss brand in the 60s and 70s. I think they went into the 80s as well. Who made real sort of professional divers watches. And they have a very sort of uncluttered dial design, I think, that might remind you of your Breitling. And they're remarkably good value at the moment, considering their history as being these really high-end professional watches that were on par with Omega and Rolex at the time.
Okay, yeah, no, I've never heard of Philips.
And they, I mean, yes, their vintage watches are highly collectible, but remarkably well priced these days. And I mean, the incredible thing, I think, and the thing which has drawn in the most collectors to these, are the fact that they made watches that were water resistant in 1970 to 2,000 meters, which were depths obviously that hadn't been experimented before. Even Omega only went to 1,000. So they are worth looking at. I think they may well appeal to you.
I shall go and do some research. Thank you.
Well, very welcome. I mean, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and a pleasure talking about your collection and your Grail watches and aspirations, and of course the history of your collection.
Bless you. Yeah, it's been interesting to actually talk to someone who is far more knowledgeable than I am in terms of watches. I'm very much still a novice in terms of understanding a lot of the heritage background, workings inside the watches. I'm just someone who has appreciated, I guess, the sort of the art design and my personal preferences of things I want to put them with. So thank you very much for taking the time for sort of having a chat to me.
Well, I mean, it's quite all right. I must say, I'd be a fool to think that I knew everything, and one's always learning, whatever sort of level of knowledge one's at. So it really has been a pleasure talking about these watches and getting a sort of a personal insight into watches, because of course one doesn't know a watch until one's spoken to someone who's worn them for a number of years.
Mm.
Well, anyway,
Well,
oh, do please speak.
no, I was going to say, well, look, I won't keep you any longer, but thank you so much for the chat conversation. It's been enlightening, and I'm going to go off and research some Philips.
Oh, well, I'm pleased to have to have spoken to you and talked to you about Philips, for example. So thank you very much, and thank you very much for having a chat.
You're really welcome.
Well, anyway, goodbye and take care.
Take care.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Anyway, I do hope you enjoyed this video and the collaboration between my kind viewer Ben and myself. And I again apologise for the sound quality. We really did do our best, but the telephone does always have its limits. So thank you very much for watching. Do please like, share and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. This is the Watch Guy, over and out.